Henry VIII and England's break from Rome, from the Church of Rome, that is to say, from the Catholic Church. I'm going to start with a woman called Catherine of Aragon. She really was quite an extraordinary woman, and if you remember, she was mentioned a little bit earlier that she married Arthur, Henry VII's son, Arthur. And he died when he was 15 years old. Now, if he hadn't died, history might be very different. But he did die. And when he died in 1502, Henry became the next candidate, the heir to the throne, the person who would be king when his father, Henry VII, died. Well, not only that, but 6 months before he died, Arthur had married Catherine, and the wife of his brother became planned, as I said just now, to be the wife of Henry. So plans were made for her to marry him. He was still a boy at this time, about 12 years old or something. Well, there were a few problems connected with her dowry. Now, I should explain what a dowry is. A dowry is, in those days, when a man and a woman married, the woman's family would pay money to the man's family. And Catherine's father, the King of Spain, had paid half. And then the brother died, and he said, well, come on, I'm not paying the rest now. He's dead, isn't he? So they had a kind of big fight about what to do with this extra money that he's supposed to pay. But if he was going to marry Henry, the other brother, then he should pay the rest of the dowry. So this argument went on for a few years, actually. But even so, they were betrothed. That means they promised that they would marry. The promise was made that these two would marry. And then 3 years later, Henry would be 15 years old, and that would be old enough for him to marry the Catherine of Aragon, who would become his queen when he was king. So there was another little problem, quite an important one, that in those days, marrying a husband... Sorry, this is a mistake. It says it's meant to say marrying a brother's wife. Marrying a brother's wife was normally forbidden by the church. So dispensation, that means permission, kyoka, had to be got from the Pope. It's a special case. Can you allow, in this case, for Henry to marry his dead brother's, to marry his dead brother's wife? Well, it was also a special case because Catherine herself said that the marriage had never been consummated. In other words, they hadn't had sex, they hadn't slept together. He was just a boy, he fell sick, he died, they didn't actually do it. Okay, so that was another reason for saying that the marriage was not really consummated. It wasn't completed. So under church law, a marriage that hasn't been completed in bed was not a marriage. And so Arthur never really was Catherine's husband. So the Pope said, okay, that's all right, you can marry Henry. And so that was sorted out. But we shall see that this was important again later on. So, okay, he's got permission to marry, and then, unfortunately, Catherine's mother died. Now, she was the Queen of Spain, and she died with no male heir, no son to become king. This meant that the value of Catherine went down. Okay? If she belongs to a Spanish royal family with a son who will be king afterwards, her value is high, because she's connected to the top power in Spain. But if there's no son in that family, her value goes down. So the fighting carries on between, she's not worth as much as she was before, I'm not going to send all the money. And so they're fighting about how much money to send and what to do. And also, Henry, the father, is also, Ferdinand would be Catherine's father, and Henry is Henry VIII's father. The two fathers are kind of fighting about the marriage, and Henry VII is actually saying, I don't want her to marry anyway. I want her to go. I don't want her to stay. And then, anyway, it looked as if this marriage was going to be impossible. But suddenly, no problems. Because the old man died. Henry VII died. And that's it. Henry VIII said, right, I'm going to marry her. Straight away. And very quickly, after the death of his father, Henry married Catherine. Okay, here she is. And she was quite a remarkable woman. Maybe Henry knew that she was a remarkable woman. Maybe that's why he said that when his father was dying, his father's last words were, marry her, marry her. It's probably not true, because Henry seemed to be causing all kinds of problems about the marriage. Maybe his son just, but he really kind of pushed to say, my father wants us to marry, we've got to get married now. Very quickly the wedding just happened. But there had been several years of a very difficult time for Catherine. No husband, the father sort of saying, well, I don't want her, you're going to keep her, what's going to happen? And she's actually having to live quite a difficult life in England. She had to sell jewellery to get enough money to eat. Okay? She still had her servants. I mean, she wasn't really exactly poor, but she wasn't living the life of a princess. She was living quite a hard life. But she was very practical. She could see what needed to be done. And she was even so clever that she became the first ambassador, the first female ambassador that there had ever been in Europe. Ferdinand said, well, she's there, and our ambassador isn't available, we haven't got anybody to represent Spain in England. Let Catherine do it. And Henry thought, oh, this will be great. We've got a woman as ambassador, I can do anything. She was really good. She wasn't just the first ambassador, she was good. And she helped Henry VIII afterwards in practical details with political life. She was a clever woman. Not much doubt about that. She was a clever woman. And not only that, but she was a leading figure in the humanist movement. Notice that all those books that were published that were not religious books, books of histories, books of Ginsha Monogatari, this is all humanism. The move away from religion into a more general kind of philosophy, a kind of really bungaku style. Okay, you could say, we still call it humanities. Bungaku is still humanities. We are students of humanities. Okay, well, before that, almost all the education had been religious education. The church, the church, the church. And she was one of the leaders of opening out education, opening out culture, making a more general kind of society that was not just based on religion. And she was friends with some very, very famous Tetsugakusha, Erasmus, More, Thomas More, and the Spanish philosopher Juan Luis Vives, who was actually the tutor for her daughter, Mary. So she was really quite a leading person for the new Renaissance ideas. And Vives dedicated one of his books to her. So she was famous as a cultural icon. Okay. The only weak point she had was that she could not give Henry a son. She had a daughter, Mary, but she did not have a male child. And by the time she was about 40, remember, firstly, Henry was 5 years younger. And secondly, by the time she's about 40, she can't have a child anymore anyway. Henry really wants a son. In those days, the thinking was, it has to be a king. It has to be a boy. And Henry doesn't have a son. He is desperate to have a male child so that we don't go back to something like Baratsing's or the Wars of the Roses again, with different people fighting and saying, I should be king. No, I should be king. He doesn't want that. All right? He wants a stable situation for his son to be king after he dies. So he's losing interest in Catherine, and he's starting to look for a way to annul her relationship. Notice this word annul, A-N-N-U-L. Notice that I'm not using the word divorce. Most people say Henry divorced Catherine. He didn't. It was even worse than that. He wanted to say, Saisho Kara, we were never married. It never was a marriage. Remember that story about getting special permission from the Pope? He wants to go to the Pope now and say, you know that special permission, that was a mistake. Really, you know, the Bible says, okay, you should follow the Bible. All right, so he wants to say it never was a marriage. He wants to annul the marriage. So he thinks that's going to be easy. He thinks he can just go. The Pope will say, yeah, sure, you're right. But it's not going to happen like that. He starts a relationship with, you get these very kind of high-class tetsudai-sama called ladies in waiting in the royal family or in high-class families. She's not just a tetsudai-sama. She is really like a companion to the queen. She is close to the queen in all kinds of situations. And Henry fell in love with, he fell in love with her, and then a few years later he fell in love with her sister. Okay, and it's the sister that he, in the end, married. The thing about the lady in waiting was that he said, you're a nice lady. Should we go to bed together? And she said yes. And then he noticed that she had a very pretty sister, and he said to her, well, you're a nice lady too. Should we go to bed together? And she said, no. She said, only one way for me, Henry. You've got to marry me. So now he really starts getting serious. I've got to divorce Catherine. Well, not divorce her, as I say. I've got to end the relationship with Catherine. It doesn't stop him from going ahead. He in the end, has a kind of marriage with Anne Boleyn, even before he's properly divorced or annulled the other relationship. But basically, this is what's happening. He's going off with another woman. So the Pope said no, as I say. He tried to convince the Pope to annul the marriage because of this thing that she was his brother's widow. But the Pope would not agree. Now the words in the Bible are this: if a man shall take his brother's wife, it is an impurity. He hath uncovered his brother's nakedness. They shall be childless. So he says, the church, the Pope, has put a curse on me. That's why I can't have a male son. It says, they shall be childless. I mean, he's forgetting that he's got a daughter. Okay? He said, look, I can't have a son because of the Bible's words, lying with my brother's wife. The Pope looks at this, and he thinks about it. Well, one thing is that the Pope is friends with the King of Spain, okay? So that doesn't help. Another thing is, he says, yeah, but this doesn't say when the brother's dead. It doesn't mean when the brother's dead. It just means you don't sleep with your brother's wife while the brother's alive. Once the brother's dead, it doesn't mean anything. So the Pope said, no, I'm not agreeing to that. So Henry was rather shocked because he thought he could do that, and he could not do that. The Pope said no. And it was only, those words from the Bible were not for a dead husband, but only for a husband who was still a brother, not a brother who was still alive for his wife. And Catherine, of course, was continuing to say that her marriage had never been consummated anyway. She never did sleep with Arthur. And so, again, she really is Henry's wife. So we've got several reasons for not saying that the marriage can be annulled. The marriage was not allowed by the Pope to be annulled. So Henry just said, well, I don't care. I don't care what the Pope says, I'll do it myself. And he got an English court to meet and to say, this marriage is annulled. Okay? Roma ho mushishite. Just ignore what the Pope says and just annul the marriage anyway. And even before that, as I say, he had a kind of marriage ceremony with Anne. And a few days after the annulment, the marriage ceremony with Anne was declared a true marriage. So inside 1 week, bye-bye, Catherine, hello, Anne. On paper. In reality, bye-bye, Catherine, about 3 years before. All right? He sent her away. And she had a difficult time until she died a few years later. And so, of course, as soon as it's like that on paper, the Pope says, Henry, you are not in my church anymore. Out! All right, now, to kick somebody out of the Catholic Church is called excommunicate. To excommunicate. It's a special word for the Catholic Church. To excommunicate means kyokai kara tobasu. Okay? Kick him out. He's not part of the Catholic Church. So, of course, as soon as Henry officially marries Anne and annuls his marriage with Catherine, then the Pope says, you are not part of my Catholic Church. You are out. So if he's out of the Catholic Church, where is he? Well, a year later, Henry was declared the supreme head of the Church of England. In other words, he is the leader of the church in his country. Not the Pope, the King. It's my church. I can do what I want. I can divorce who I want. I can marry who I want. I can do what I want. It's my church. And this was the central turning point, this moment when the Pope says, you're not in my church, and then Henry says, well, it's my church now. I'm the head of the church. Okay, it's my eikoku kyokai, and I'm the number one person. Okay, this is the turning point in a process that really lasted about 8 years. It was a slow, step by step. But in the end, that's it. Henry is outside the Church of England. Henry is outside the Catholic Church, and the English Church, the Eikoku Kyokai, is also outside Roma Catholicu no Kyokai. It's outside the Roman Catholic Church. Well, this is a kind of strange situation. You see, England is breaking away from Rome, so England is not being Catholic anymore. But, of course, during this time, the church in Europe was in crisis. This was the Reformation. This was the time when the Protestants were separating from the Catholics. And maybe you've heard of Luther, Martin Luther, who put his ideas against the church, his fuhe, his complaints against the church on the door of the church. And he was, of course, a Catholic. And he did not think that he would leave the Catholic Church. He just wanted to say, my Catholic Church that I love, please notice that you are making some serious mistakes here. But the Catholic Church said, we're not listening to you. you get up. All right? He didn't want that. He didn't expect that. He didn't choose that. That's what the Catholic Church did. That was their reaction. So because they reacted like that, then there became separate churches away from the Catholic Church. So this was the Reformation movement. Now, it's really ironic that Henry and Luther were really big enemies. I mean, if you could read Latin, you would be shocked. I mean, you think, oh, Latin is really keishiki, formal language, and people must talk in a very, educated way. Oh my God, you should read what Henry says to Luther in those books. And you should read what Luther says to Henry. I mean, sugoku warui-kotoba skaimasu. And really, bujoku, really strong insults. Really, very, very rude. Okay? Shocking language. Okay? In Latin, insulting each other, calling each other bad names, and they wrote books and letters, and they communicated, and they hated each other. Henry hated Luther, Luther hated Henry. So it's really ironic that they both kicked out of the Roman Catholic Church. They kicked out of the church together in that way, but not together in their thinking about religion. In fact, when Henry attacked Luther, when Henry made all these insulting and rude attacks on Luther, the Pope said, well done. I will give you a special reward. Henry, you are fidei defensor. You are a defender, a protector of the Catholic faith. You are special for Catholics. You are special title FD Fidei Defensor. And so in 1521, the Pope gave Henry a special title as a good Catholic. But a little bit more than 10, 12, was it 13, 14 years later, the Pope says, Henry, you are out of the Catholic Church. But even though he's out of the Catholic Church, Henry basically agrees with the Catholics. He doesn't agree with what the Protestants are saying. All right, the Protestants have all kinds of ideas about religion, and Henry says no. So it's a kind of strange situation during Henry's lifetime. The church is not Catholic, but it's not really Protestant. We will talk about this in more detail in later classes. We've got a kind of mannaka no kyokai. It's not really Catholic, it's not really Protestant. Okay? But he did have to, dakkyo shinai to ikenai. Okay? He had to make some compromises. And one compromise he had to make was to say, okay, you can translate the Bible into English. Imamade kinshi deshita kedo. The Protestants, in all the Protestant countries, the Bible was translated into English. So Henry, shoganai kara, he said, okay, you can translate the Bible into English. But only 3 years before he said that, only 3 years before Henry's English Bible was published, he burned poor William Tyler to death for translating the Bible into English. Only 3 years before. Okay, so this is a real big, quick change. So this is the biggest compromise he made for the Protestants, really. There's poor William Tyndale in 1536 being burned to death, and his last words up here, his last words were, may the Lord open the King of England's eyes. Lord meaning Kami-sama, open the King of England's eyes. Make him see the truth, that we need the Bible in a language that people understand. And then, as I say, 3 years later, in 1539, the Great Bible, which actually, again, much of Tyndale's translation was in this Bible. So even using the same language from Tyndale, but with a different editor, it was published. And Henry not only allowed it, Henry paid for it. So, yes, he did change his mind, but I don't think we could really say that he opened his eyes. Because I don't think he did it for religion. 宗教のためにやったわけではないと思います。So, the Bible in English, and we'll talk again in detail about why that was important. And the next thing that I'd like to open up today, we'll talk again a little bit more about it later on. The monasteries, Shodoi, he closed them all down. Okay? Until this time, there had been many people, monks and nuns, nuns, shisuta, and men who lived a life of religion. Well, to tell the truth, a lot of those places were scandalous anyway, and there had been complaints and, there had been problems with them. They weren't always very religious places, but they were now all going to be closed. And really, one of the big reasons for doing this was that he could get a lot of money and a lot of land. These monasteries were rich. And they owned a lot of valuable land, which he could then sell. And over a period of about 5-6 years, he closed them all down. And one of Shakespeare's sonnets has the famous line, "Bare ruined choirs where late the sweet birds sang." It means ruined choirs, people singing, where late means recently, citing the sweet birds sang. And he's talking about the monasteries that have been closed and destroyed. And this brought Henry a lot of money. He was able to sell the land, sell the property, and that would help to get money for the wars that he liked fighting in Europe. Some of the monks and nuns left England, but most of them stayed behind. They got a small pension. If they were men, they could become priests. They became Shimpusama in the church. They weren't allowed to marry, but they were able to carry on some sort of life. And the buildings themselves were, many of them, destroyed. Now, the pictures you're going to see here now, some of them are in Europe, they're not all in England, but actually most of them are English monasteries. After I put it up, I thought, oh, I made a mistake. They're not all English, but most of them are, all right? One or two of them you kind of notice are a different style. But here you go. These were the monasteries, and they're still there, okay? I mean, this is a photograph now, all right? The ruin is still there. And this is what Shakespeare was talking about when he talked about bare ruined choirs where late the sweet birds sang. These are the ruins. And once recently, not so many years before Shakespeare, these were places where people sang sweet songs, Kami-sama no uta. So it's a lot of people think, this is Shakespeare saying, what a terrible thing to close the monasteries. And here they are. You can see so many of them. This one we saw, but many others. All right, most of them English. All right. This one's not English. Okay, sorry about that. That's a mistake, really. Mostly they're English. And some of that's a European one. Some of them are, some of them are still in good condition, but most of them are just ruins. But they're still there all over England. You can see these ruined monasteries that were closed in the early 16th century by Henry VIII. And another line from Shakespeare here. He says, "Those that can pity here may, if they think it well, let forth a tear." So if you do have a sense of pity and you think about it, you might cry. Okay? I'm not saying that I feel like I don't know if you know Father Millwood. He's Jesus Guy. He retired a good few years ago, but he's very famous. One of those people who says William Shakespeare was a Catholic. I'm not sure about that, but Shakespeare does seem to show a feeling of we lost something important when the monasteries were closed. But as I say, a lot of the convents and monasteries had fallen into bad ways, and there had been complaints against them, and popular feeling was against them. We have to pay taxes so that they can live an easy life. And they're not really living a life for God. They are Gizensha, they are hypocritical. So there's a lot of that going on as well. So basically, this is the story of Henry VIII, separating from the Church of Rome, from the Catholic Church, because he wanted a new wife.